Greetings and salutations, JordanXlord with the Imperial Cultural Society. Where have I been? It's been over 2 years since I last uploaded. For that, I have to say, I am super sorry. Lots been going on. For example, the traumatic experience of going from a disembodied voice on the internet to now a PNG tuber that you can now see and have something to associate the voice with. Then I was kidnapped by the cult of Razmir, after discovering that the summer home in Razmiran was a little too good to be true. Last time I am ever using Zillow. I still wake up in a cold sweat hearing the phrase, "Obey the living God," and seeing plastic cosplay tier masks hovering over me. So, instead of going to therapy, I am going to crack open my skull and feed you all the Pathfinder lore I had managed to learn so you could avoid the same fate as me. Today we are starting our talk on the deities of the Pathfinder Inner Sea region, with the one deity who isn't actually a god. Today, we of course talk about the one god who asks the question,
don't you want to become a cult leader? Since the death of God, there's been a vacancy open.
Before we go into the lore, let me give you the mechanics required if you seek to abandon your family, friends, and fortune to follow fantasy Scientology. Razmir, otherwise known as the Living God and the Master of the 31 Steps, has the following mechanics. His area of concern involves law, luxury, and obedience. His edicts that you must follow is that you must follow the path of the 31 steps, obey those who speak with Razmir's voice, and pay tithes and tributes to the living God. What are these 31 steps? Well, if you pay the Church of Razmir all of your life savings, you'll get to find out the first 3. His anathema, or what you shouldn't do, is disobey Razmir or one of his priests, or question the truth of the living God. I can't imagine anyone abusing the system for their own benefit. Well, I guess the living God doesn't really care how his pyramid is built. When you're on the top, you can choose to be ignorant of the amount of suffering and bodies used to build said pyramid. His divine attribute is charisma or intelligence. Both are needed to continue the greatest grift of all time in Pathfinder. Religious symbol? Well, it's the fucking mask he and all of his followers wear. Morality aside, the guy knows branding. His sacred animal is the honey guide, which after looking it up in Google turns out to be a bird that guides people to beehives. Neat. The sacred animal spell becomes really funny as you send birds at people. His sacred colors are gold, purple, and silver, which hey, I'm gonna give it to him here. They're the best colors in my completely biased opinion. Clerics can't choose Razmir as their deity, or gain any of his devotee benefits unless they have his archetype. Which brings up an interesting question. If you're starting a campaign at level 2 or higher, could you just play a full-on cleric? What happens at level 1? Do you just have no powers? Also, rules as written, this doesn't stop champions from choosing him as their deity, and you should totally capitalize on Paizo missing this detail. His priest gain the following spells: Charm, Stupefy, and Mind Reading, which they can use in case the unenlightened masses start questioning them, or if they need to start checking for non-believers and people starting to doubt your totally real God. His divine font is Harm, because nothing screams benevolent God King like hurting non-believers. Sanctification, you can choose to be unholy, which is almost as surprising as the fact that his divine skill is deception. Anyways, on to more obvious facts. His domains include magic, secrecy, trickery, and wealth, and his favorite weapon is everyone's second least favorite weapon outside of the dagger, the humble mace. great people of Stonebank, heed these words, and let truth pierce the lies you have been fed. The time of doubt is over. The so-called gods sit idle in the far-off heavens, too proud to stoop, too aloof to act. They bicker while your granaries rot. They war amongst themselves while your children starve. But Razmir has not abandoned you. Razmir walks among us. He sees your labor, and he knows your pain. Yet he does not ask for simple faith, for faith is the currency of fools. No, he demands only your obedience, and in return, he gives what the old gods have never delivered. Protection, prosperity, and purpose. Ask yourselves, where was Caden and his wine-bloated clergy when the raiders came? Did Sarenrae shine her light on your sick when your healer's herbs ran dry? When your fields lay buried beneath winter's cruel frost, did Iristil bring you bread? No. But Razmir did. Razmir sent grain. Razmir sent warmth. Razmir sent order. You are not forgotten. You are not forsaken. You are on the edge of something greater. A nation not of lies and chaos, but of truth. Join us. Lay down your doubts and lift up the mask. For in unity there is strength. In service there is ascension. And in Razmir there is everything. Praise be to the masked god, whose face is too glorious for mortal eyes. Praise be to the 31 steps of enlightenment, which lift even the lowest of us to greatness. Praise be to Razmir, the only god who answers, and the only god who delivers. Razmir has been a fan-favorite villain since Pathfinder 1st Edition, or at least he's been one of my favorites, and as a fan of Pathfinder 1st and 2nd Edition, I can definitely confirm. While we know about his early life is unsurprisingly very little, one story will tell you that he grew up in the Varizian countryside as a farmer who left his simple life when he discovered a secret library of the Rune Lords. You know, immortal wizards of epic power known for their rune magic. Another story tells that he was once a lowly orphan who always wanted more and grew up in the sewers of Opara, the capital city of the Taldor Empire, an old empire that is a shadow of its former self. All of these conflicting tales only happen to agree on one thing, and that is the living god started off from humble beginnings. Humble or not, Razmir eventually resurfaced as a level 19 wizard. After developing his self-help book known as the 31 Steps, he left to go touch the magical space realm that turns you into a god. You know, the one that's in the middle of fantasy New York. Source? His autobiography. After ascending the Trial of the Starstone, the mortal wizard gained the divine revelation that he must use his new godly powers to destabilize a small nation, shortly afterwards appearing in the Archduchy of Melkat in the western part of the River Kingdoms. He appeared to what would be most generously called a conflict zone, as in what little information I could find about Melkat describes a history of dukes and duchesses replacing each other on a regular enough basis that would make Westeros blush, where he began to show off his high-level wizard powers, masquerading as a god, telling people that if they buy his 31-step plan, they could have all the power and wealth that they could ever want. You know, like a cult leader. Then, with his newfound cult, he arrived at the capital city of Erdune. Razmir calmly approached Duke Pelin Melcat, hell of a name, and politely asked him to swear fealty to him. He was rebuked. He then asked not so nicely an additional time, and again the Duke said nah. After the third attempt, Razmir left without a word to the Duke, before likely going to the followers in the city that he can't easily replace and telling them not to come to school tomorrow. Then, as a reminder to never piss off a high-level Pathfinder character, especially a wizard with a god complex, Razmir used the 10th level rank spell Cataclysm for each time the Duke denied him. The city of Erdune and all of its population were reduced to ash. On that night, the Archduchy of Melcat was no more, leaving only the angry ghost of the last Duke, and the mindless undead that rises from the ruins. And thus, the nation of Razmiran was born. Quickly had the living god carved pieces of the river kingdoms out for himself. Unknown petty kingdoms that weren't given names were sacrificed on the altar of his grand ambitions, alongside the countless laborers that would build his home and capital city of Thronestead. His city is kept strictly divided into 2 districts. The steppes, where Razmir and all of his highest-ranking cult members revel in decadence, much like a tourist district in North Korea. The stones, on the other hand, were pretty much the rest of North Korea the military escort doesn't want you to see. Within the poverty-stricken slums of the stones, there's a weekly celebration, known simply as the Choosing, where 5 worshippers of the living god are selected to speak and plead their case with Razmir himself. It just so happens that he only chooses people that his church has planted, leaving the entire city in a perpetual false hope for over 30 years. However, as the living god continued to age, he began to throw his nation's entire economy towards buying the potion that temporarily makes you no longer a boomer and able to understand how TikTok works. Known simply as the Sun Orchid Elixir. Eventually, he would get outbid. And eventually he would be outbid over and over again. Every attempt to acquire more of the mythical Sunny D had failed. Age would eventually begin to be a problem for Razmir. Doesn't help that he's been growing more paranoid and angry like all dictators tend to end up. Just in case Razmir thought he was done putting out the fires towards his plan of finally achieving godhood, the Pathfinder's equivalent of Nagash, otherwise known as Tar-Bathon, was freed from his prison. And that prison wasn't far from the shores of Razmiran. So for the low price of 1,000 corpses per month, Tar-Bathon would not bother him or invade his country. Then, as the events of the War of the Immortals sourcebook, when the former god of war Gorum realized how evil his followers were becoming, he chose suicide by Mantis God. This led to shards of his broken armor falling across the world, his divine essence infused in each piece. The event known as the God's Reign. Those affected by the God's Reign would gain access to the mythic system, becoming demigods in the process. Funnily enough, though, Razmir was not one of the people who got these powers. Despite him constantly trying to join the Divine, it would end up happening to some of his priests, leading to the very mortal 19-level wizard having to deal with new gods challenging his reign. The lack of a response on his part has led to the citizens theorizing 2 possibilities. 1, that Razmir doesn't see these would-be demigods as a threat. Or 2, that he's avoiding a conflict he knows he can't win. I am going to guess number 2. Here is where I would put the Razmir Starfinder lore, if there was any. Since there's a very likely chance that by the time in Pathfinder's timeline, where space travel is a common thing, Razmir has probably been taken down by an adventuring party, or less impressively, just perished from old age. Although, if he did survive into the future, he managed to move his house off Galarian before the Gap removed the planet in its entirety, I could see Razmir either finally ascending to godhood, or more likely be digitalized into a computer that prints out the Starfinder's equivalent to Bitcoin. Or he's an influencer making Manosphere YouTube videos. Now, after telling you all of this, and you still want to sign your life away to become part of the MLM that is the Church of Razmir, beginning your first of 31 steps and don the mask, then here is the archetype for you, starting with the Razmiran Priest dedication at level 2, which grants you the signature mask of the cult that gives you a bonus to deception checks. You can also take the Cleric dedication, choosing Razmir as your deity, and all of the spells granted by this archetype are occult spells instead of divine spells, and any feat that has the divine trait instead will have the occult trait. Also, your spellcasting attribute for these spells becomes Charisma instead of Wisdom. Then at 6th level, you can take Perfect Truths, granting you the power to structure all of your lies with enough truth that from a certain perspective seems like the real deal. You can also lie while under the effect of the Ring of Truth spell or similar effects, and when you first begin speaking, you can attempt a deception check to counteract the spell. At 10th level, you gain the Mask of the 12th Step, instructed with the secrets of making an even stronger mask that makes you even more able to lie and gaslight the universe. It comes with arguably one of the funniest abilities in this game. Call upon Razmir's mercy. 2 actions, 3 times a day. You can do the magical equivalent of the placebo effect. You temporarily reduce the stage of an affliction and suppress its effects for 24 hours. Afterwards, it returns full force. Unless, they make the saves, then they're great. Which has given me the incredibly cursed scene of a family going to a priest of Razmir to treat the disease of their only child. They promise that so long as their family hold Razmir in their hearts, that Razmir will save them. And if there's any doubt, Razmir's blessing will fade. If the child gets better, sweet, Razmir be praised. But if they don't, at 15th level, you have reached the 15th step. Your mask gains a +3 to deception checks, and another ability. Call upon Razmir's wrath. Once per day, you can replicate what Razmir did to Melcat, allowing you to cast the spell Sunburst as an occult spell of 8 rank. But this isn't as effective as Undead because it gains the incapacitation trait, because again, it's not really divine magic. Finally, at 20th level, you are a higher level than your deity, and that grants you the following. Your mask becomes a +4 for deceptions, and an apex item, meaning that it will increase your charisma either to +4, or if it's higher, by +1. It also grants you one last ability, known as the Power of the Living God, which, once per day, allows you to cast Manifestation as a 10th rank occult spell. While the spell will always have the incapacitation trait, it is incredibly funny to just gaslight the universe into divine intervention for a fake religion. I genuinely find Razmir to be one of the many reasons I adore the Pathfinder setting. There's just something incredibly funny of a high-level wizard masquerading as a god in a world where the deities are real. Just being the biggest grifter in the world, but also being too scared to make that final leap towards divinity is something I find personally very engaging for an antagonist, especially after his initial successes. Watching everything he has lied and cheated to begin slowly crumbling away is equally as hilarious. You gotta build them up before you knock them down. That's how storytelling works. Also, I really couldn't find a place for this, but his church also makes a drug called the Tears of Razmir. So on top of being a cult leader, he is literally a drug dealer, which is just really funny. Our next video is going to be on a deity that is actually a god, so that's going to be fun. Looking forward to that. And all I have to say is to those who are still here, always remember, stay safe and stay glorious.